I'm 47, male. I had not so small but successful automobile business with which I used to support my small family. My wife, Pamela, was a stay-at-home wife who had always wanted to go to college. This is until she got pregnant with my daughter, Hannah. Our marriage came soon after, and while I was not in love with Pamela then, she has become an irreplaceable part of my life. And Hannah tightened the bond in the family when she was born. I promised to take care of both of them, despite being the sole earner in the family. Pamela eventually let go of her dreams of completing her education, much to Christina's, my mother-in-law's, chagrin. I made sure neither she nor Hannah lacked anything. Everything was going well until a deal went sour and my entire business went under. My wife did the best she could at the time, and I think Hannah was fresh out of middle school back then, so the need for money kept on growing until she had to take action. She got help from her parents and took out her personal savings to start up a small fashion brand, just to support the family, and was always a shoulder for me to lean on. At first, it was more than I could have asked for, but years later it became a burden. Call it pride, raw masculinity, or whatever, but I could not just sit back and let my family struggle forever. And my mother-in-law was not helping matters either. That woman was a real thorn in my side, and I was tired of doing my best to see her in a positive light. I could only respect her because she was my wife's mother. She took every opportunity to remind me of the fact that I was in my then current predicament because my wife wasn't working. I recall my wife and I having small arguments just because Christine had told her one thing or the other, obviously to poison my wife against me. It was always during a visit or a phone call, and no, I'm not being dramatic. Christine had never liked me right from the very beginning, and while I understand her reasons, I was not one to stand by when someone tried to harm me or my family. Pamela always listened to reason, thankfully, and every argument we had was resolved within a few days. I helped Pamela run her business in the beginning, and I gave her tips regarding the pricing, assisted in spreading the word, and put in a word or two when she decided to get new equipment or venture into a potential risk for her business. She was fond of telling me I played a vital role in the success of her small business, and while it was nice to hear, she did all the work. But if I were being honest with myself, I hated it. I could not tolerate being a couch potato, and I could not exactly go waitressing or being a small car wash. I had gone for a few interviews, but none were successful, and yes, I got discouraged quite quickly. Pamela always told me not to beat myself up about it, but those words fell on deaf ears. I had never felt so useless in my entire existence, and I hope this does not make anybody mad or sound offensive. It's just how I felt at that time. Also, I'll be leaving out a few details from now on, but they're not really relevant. One day, I decided to go abroad and start something new. I'd gotten a few contacts and had a dream of rebuilding my small brand from scratch. I told Pamela about my decision, and naturally she was skeptical. But I promised her that I'd be back within a year after making a name for myself again. Hannah was grown and could understand the situation we were in. She was even working part-time jobs herself. So, after days of persuasion, my small family supported my decision. I took up a loan, put up my house as collateral, and then left to make a living once again. I even stayed with a friend of mine, hoping to leave as soon as I'd gotten back on my feet. It did not go well. I won't go into the details because not only do they not matter at this point, I feel stupid whenever I remind myself of the mistakes I made in my, bid to make money for myself. And once again, my pride did not let me tell my wife about it. I had promised her that I'd be successful, but nothing had come of my promise. I'd failed as a husband and as a man. My wife and daughter tried to get in contact, naturally, but I ignored both of them. I had nothing to my name, and I did not even need, any more debt. I told myself that I'd call Pamela when things were looking promising and even explain things to her. She would always understand, or so I thought. I went home 3 years later after getting a job in sales for a year. It had paid fairly well, and I hoped to slowly pay off the debt I was in and look for another job as well. Pamela's dad was fairly reasonable, so all I had to do was explain myself and pay him back with some interest. However, before I got back, I tried to get in contact with Pamela. She must have changed numbers because I could not get through to her. Her parents did not take any calls either, though I was not surprised when Christine's line went straight to the voicemail. Hannah had not replied when I tried social media, but I didn't blame her. I had done the same to her after all. To both of them, in fact. No matter how many times they tried to reach out, I pushed them away because of my darn pride. I hate that I let my pride get the best of me. And while it has definitely lessened ever since I'd gotten my new job, I could tell the damage had already been done. I wasn't so delusional to expect my wife and daughter to take me back with open arms. But to hear them accuse me of abandoning them with a lot of debt was quite a shock. Where did that even come from? I knew that the house was bank collateral and that we had a few bills to pay before I left, but I assumed Pamela would get some money from her parents, and it turned out that Pamela's dad had passed away in the 3 years I was gone. And they really struggled to pay back the loan I'd taken up. It was another shock, one I'm still recovering from, because I was fond of my wife's father. He would have helped out without hesitating, and now his partner was in charge of the business that he was involved in. The inflow of money was still there, but it had reduced greatly. My old house was now for sale, but that was not my main concern. Oh no! I completely understand why my family has been giving me the cold shoulder. I did not know that things would be so hard for them. I didn't know it. But life does have a way of turning odds into reality. I'd planned to slowly earn the trust of my family back, but they refused to hear me out no matter how much I tried to explain myself. I know a lot of it is just going to be the blame of me, but if there's anything you can think that I can do to fix this, please let me know in the comment section. Update number 1. I'm not getting anywhere at this rate. I might as well give up. I went to visit my family after a week, and I'd thought of giving them some space in the hopes that they'd start to come around, but they weren't home. No one was, and calling was not an option. I would have been so discouraged if no one answered my call. So, I went over to my mother-in-law's place again the next day. In case this was not clear in my first post, Hannah and Pamela live there now. She answered and almost slammed the door right in my face, and I told her that I'd be out of her hair after talking to Pamela and sorting things out. She told me that they were not my concern anymore and threatened to call the police. Normally, I ignore Christine when she becomes dramatic, but I wasn't having it this time. I pushed past her and repeated my question, telling her that I was not leaving till I got some answers that I wanted, and she did not budge. I almost gave up until I saw my daughter come down the stairs. I tried talking to Hannah, but my now 18-year-old daughter refused to hear anything I had to say. She told me she only came out because she had heard what I told Christine, and then she gave me Pamela's new number before begging me to leave. Well, I obliged her, not because I wanted to, but because I was too helpless at this point. When I first visited, I understood their anger and did not let it bother me too much. I had left my family, and they even struggled and resented me for it, and I totally understand. But seeing Hannah today and hearing her ask me to leave did something to me. I'm not sure I'll be able to explain myself properly, but it seemed to me that she'd given up on her ever having me back in her life. There was no longer any anger on her face. No resentment, no sadness, nothing. It was more of a resignation, That feeling you get after seeing an ex with a new partner, or after trying to get on someone's good side and failing countless times. When I went back to the small hotel I stayed at for the time being, I won't lie, I almost gave up at that point. If my daughter felt that way about me, I was not eager to find out how my wife was feeling. But I still made the call despite my fears. And she answered on the first ring, and to my surprise she mentioned my name and asked what I wanted. I had no idea she knew I was calling, and that if she knew, she'd take the call immediately. It gave me a little hope, honestly. I told her to hear me out and began to apologize, telling her that I never should have ignored her in the first place. She was quiet as I spoke, and despite the gnawing feeling in my chest telling me that I was only wasting my time, I still kept at it. When I mentioned feeling distraught after failing yet again at getting a means of income, she stopped me and asked who I stayed with. I told her that it was just a friend of mine. I even mentioned his name and everything. She didn't know who he was. Pam was one of those people who would not be bothered if she did not know everything about you. It was one thing I loved about her, the faith she had in me, and she proceeded to ask if the woman I stayed with was the one I'd left her to be with. Her question threw me off a bit. I'm sure it took me about a minute before I could answer properly, and you guessed it, I'd ask who she was talking about because I'd clearly stated that I lived with a man for 2 years. Pamela told me she did not have the patience for these sort of games, and ended the call right away. So, I called back, but she didn't answer. I didn't sleep that night, tossing and turning while in bed, and that's when it hit me. Well, I stayed with my friend, Benjamin is his name, by the way, his divorced sister Abigail, and her kid came over all the time. But then again, how did Pamela know about her? I spoke to Abigail only when she came over, and after all, I was living with her brother, you know. So, we weren't exactly friends. She was a nice person, and we got along well, sure, but that was it. I even found Abigail to be a bit overbearing and clingy, and I didn't like that in a woman. Besides, I never spoke to Pamela over the phone when I was abroad since we both ignored each other, so it wasn't like Pamela had heard Abigail in the background or something, and Abigail did not know I had a family. Nothing was adding up. It had to be Abigail, Pamela, she was talking about. But how did she know about Abigail, and why was it a problem? I can't figure it out, and I know going over to the house would be a waste of time, again, since I've managed to accidentally cause more problems between my wife and me. Is there something I'm not seeing here, guys? Let me know what you think in the comment section. Update number 2. Hey, I know it's been a while, but I've become a detective overnight, and there are a few things that have come to light. Also, I'm in an even greater danger of losing my family for good this time. I'll try to write out everything in detail, and it might even help me to clear my head and think rationally. After eliminating options when my call with Pamela ended, I was left with 2 choices. Call Abigail or try talking to my family again. The first one seemed like the easier option, so I decided to try that before visiting again. I called Abigail early the next morning, and she sounded unnecessarily happy when she spoke. Despite asking why I called so late, yeah, it was pretty late over there. After exchanging the necessary pleasantries, I asked if she spoke to Pamela or Hannah. She sounded confused over the phone, asking me who they were. I told her they were my family and begged her, please, to recall if they'd ever called or anything like that. It was then Abigail apologized, saying she was too tired from work to fulfill my request, and it was one of the strangest phone calls I've ever had. But I did not exactly call Abigail on occasion, so I didn't ponder over it. A few hours went by, and I stopped by Christine's again. This time she let me in, which should have surprised me then, but I was hell-bent on talking to Pamela, and did not think much about her actions. Neither my daughter nor my wife were around, so I was left with just Christine. I really should have left when I realized I was alone with her, but I thought then that Pamela must have put the idea of me and Abigail in her mother's mind. Hence her increased disliking for me. Perhaps Christine would change Pamela's mind if she just simply knew about the truth. So, I went ahead to tell Christine that there was nothing going on between me and any other woman, explaining that Abigail was only the sister of the friend that I had lived with. Christine called me all sorts of names, and I mean all sorts, then told me to forget all about Pamela and Hannah. That was when I had the crazy idea of calling Abigail again. When I told her to tell Christine that I was being truthful, she hesitated for a moment before ending the phone call. She did not take her calls again. Long story short, I left the house, and I could not stand being with Christine alone. I was sure she felt the same way. Abigail did not take any of her calls that day, and I began to wonder why that was the case. I then assumed that she was just irritated with my persistent probing, and let it go in the hopes of running into Pamela or Hannah. A few days later, I happened to see Pamela outside of our home. I was in a taxi on my way to Hannah's old workplace, since I got tired of waiting and she was talking to a realtor. I found this out later on, by the way. When I approached her, she looked like she was going to absolutely just run away. But she could not, since she wasn't alone. Plus, I made matters worse by introducing myself as her husband. Anyways, I learned that Pamela was selling the house. I was going to ask the realtor why that was, but that would lead to more questions, and I didn't want to do anything that would aggravate my wife. After remaining quiet until the meeting was over, I asked Pamela for an explanation. She was rude, which was rare, but when she realized I was going to leave, I was satisfied with what I've heard. I learned a few more things after my conversation with Pamela, and Hannah had plans to study in another state, and Pamela had coincidentally gotten a job offer there as well. My wife had a knack for fashion, apparently, and had grown in the field during the past few years I was gone. I was proud of her and my daughter until I realized that their plans did not involve me in the slightest, and Pamela did look a bit apologetic when she told me that they were already, found a buyer for the house, but her tone indicated that she was not going to let the deal slip away just because I was back. I expressed my happiness for my family, then told Pamela about my new job and the plans I had made for her and Hannah. Unfortunately, nothing I said fazed her, and she made a move to leave. When I asked why she thought I'd abandon her for someone else, she told me she heard her voice when she called one day. I stupidly asked for a name, which angered Pamela even more. She left without saying another word. So, I call up Abigail immediately. She did not take her call for the first time, but she did say when I called the 7th time. I asked the exact same question I did when I called her for the first time since I traveled back to my hometown, and I heard it, the hesitation. When I told her I'd involve Ben if she did not spill the beans of what she was clearly hiding, she told me everything. I still had questions after, but at least I found out that there was a misunderstanding stemming from this. And I was right. Abigail, she was the mystery woman, and Christine had a hand in everything. It turns out that Pamela had really spoken to Abigail, twice, in fact. But before the second time, Christine had a word with Abigail. Abigail told me that Christine had called and told her that she had to make Pamela believe she was the woman I'd gone to be with. I asked Abigail why she'd even agreed to something so ludicrous. She told me she had a thing for me back then. Oh, man. Also, Christine had sent her some money to do it, which helped her make up her mind faster. Recall that Abigail had gone through a divorce. She did not take anything from her ex-husband and kept visiting because she needed favors from her brother. I could not believe my ears. It sounded like a plot out of a terrible movie. and I was beyond disgusted. Abigail kept on apologizing, saying she really thought my marriage was over, and that she did not know it was going to cause so much harm. After yelling at her, I ended the phone call. It wasn't like I was going to see her again anyways. Christine is going to hear from me tomorrow. I'd go there tonight, but I need to calm down first. I wonder why she went to such lengths to break up my family, but hey, I'm going to find out pretty soon. Update number 3. Oh man, I feel so discouraged as I write this, because even after learning the absolute truth, nothing has changed. Pamela and Hannah will be traveling soon without me. I'll keep this short because I'm not in the best spirit at the moment. Christine confessed everything when I went over to her place, and since it was the weekend, my wife and daughter were there. Apparently, Christine had done some digging and found out where I was and more about Abigail and Ben. That was how she knew Abigail needed the money she did. Pamela had heard Abigail's voice, and after Christine managed to convince my wife, Pamela believed that I had indeed abandoned them. At least I did not have to say much. Pamela was furious, and Hannah was thoroughly shocked, or at least that's what I concluded after seeing her facial expression. She did not say a single word while Pamela confronted Christine. Christine reminded Pamela that I'd stayed out of touch for years, and I told Pamela it was because I was ashamed. We were at it for a while, and Christine and I were just passing the blame between us, while Pamela ranted and raved, and I really hope the neighbors did not hear so much. I was not a fan of the drama and hated when it left the 4 walls of my house when it did happen. In the end, Pamela, she left the house with Hannah. Christine cursed at me, but I was used to it. I did not even retaliate, despite having plenty of reasons to. I dialed both Pamela and Hannah, but only Hannah went through for a few seconds, and I heard Pamela tell her not to say a word to me before ending the call. Again, I was hopeful. Hannah had taken the call, meaning she had decided to give me a chance and hear me out. I don't know if it was a conscious decision, but it did not really change much, and at that moment I was happy. My daughter was slowly warming up to me. I thought of trying to get to Pamela through Hannah, but that would be for later. I didn't know where Pamela stayed, but she asked to meet me at a cafe a few days later, and I even thought that she had wanted to talk things through, but to my dismay, my wife was stone-faced when I met with her. She apologized for her mother's behavior and for accusing me falsely, and I apologized as well and told her that it was all my fault. Well, she agreed with me, then proceeded to inform me that she and Hannah would still be moving and leaving in 2 months. This time, I did not try to convince her to stay. I told her that I'd go with them, and she told me she wasn't comfortable with that idea. Pamela had laid emphasis on the fact that I'd left them without any explanation for years, and that she was not going to forgive me that easily. I tried to explain how I felt back then, and she understood, as I knew she would, but she said she just needed some time. I asked how long it would take before she would accept me back into her life. She said she didn't know and wished me the best of luck in my job search and left. I just stayed there for hours, ordering things I wasn't interested in eating. I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I'm still hoping for a miracle when everything points to the fact that my marriage has been hit by a major wrecking ball that it might not ever recover from. The only bright side to everything was Pamela cutting ties with Christine. Well, I guess it's not really a bright side, especially if I'm considering my family, but I'd prefer for my family to be far from someone who was that manipulative. I got to know about this yesterday after Christine called to ask if I could ask Pamela to forgive her. It was a shocker, and still is, and I told her that Pamela was not speaking to me either. Christine said Pamela and Hannah had officially moved out the day before. Christine asked if I knew where they were, and after I'd had enough, I just ended the phone call. I took a risk and texted Hannah afterwards, and she still has not replied. Maybe I was deluding myself into thinking my daughter was slowly coming around, and I don't know what else to do or if I should do anything. Maybe it's best to be out of her life for good. I'd check on Hannah every once in a while and keep hoping that Pamela would forgive me. Update number 4. Hey everyone, I hope you guys are doing well. This update's going to be small and my last update. Pamela, she called me again. It's been over 3 months since I last saw her, and she told me about a job opening over there. She also mentioned coming over with Hannah to visit for a few days and asked if I was okay with it. I had gotten a small apartment a month ago, and it was fairly decent, and I immediately said yes. Hannah texted me. We'd been texting for a while now and told me that Pamela was starting to come around, which was why she asked to visit. Christine was still out of the picture, and for the first time since I've known her, I felt bad for the old woman. Well, I don't think I'll post anything here anymore, because I'm sure that I'll be able to get my family back together. Yeah, it probably won't be right away, but it's going to happen, I promise.